Welcome back. We talk a lot about illegal immigration, not as much about legal immigration, which is its own topic and worthy of exploration. But even when we talk about illegal immigration, there is a great debate that is being danced around. So first, the Trump administration says they are going after the worst of the worst. On the other side, Democrats and their media pals say that they're going after innocent people, and in some cases, even American citizens. That's patently false. No one is being deported as an American citizen, perhaps detained at times to determine immigration status. But if we take those two buckets, there is a third category, one where the real debate lies, one where the opinion of the American people and the existing laws of the United States matter, and that is illegal immigration. People who are here, whose only crime is, and it is a crime, but whose only crime is crossing our border illegally. I want to dig into this. Take a look. So here's a chart that shows, according to Pew, the number of illegal immigrants in the United States. You can see that it's grown significantly over the last 25 years, spiking, by the way, during the Biden administration. But here's the deal. We know these numbers are not accurate. The number of people here illegally is much larger than 14 million. But that's the point. What do we do with all of the people that are here illegally, but not the worst of the worst? We asked the Will Cain Show, DHS, of the people that you are arresting and deporting, how much of them fit that category? How much of them are violent criminals, the worst of the worst? And how much of them are illegal, simply illegal immigrants? DHS told us this: 70% of those arrested by ICE have a known criminal history. 30% no known criminal history outside of border crossing. It's important to note that 70% can include any crime. It can include DUI. It can include traffic violations, but that is criminal. The question is still this 30%, because this number of illegal people in this country is incredibly large. And by the way, exploded under the Biden administration. You see, under the Biden administration, those illegal immigrants were called asylum seekers, and they were given temporary protected status. There's roughly 1.3 million of them, according to the government's data, that have temporary protected status. And they come from all over the world. Most of them, you'll remember, came from Venezuela or Haiti or El Salvador. But the question remains, for the American people, what do we do with the very, very large population of people in this country who are here, simply here illegally? Joining me now is the Center for Immigration Studies Director of Policy Studies, Jessica Vaughn. Jessica, here's why this conversation fascinates me. That seems to have become a controversial question, the one that I ask right now. I think it's at the heart of much of this debate, the gap between the left and the right. But it wasn't always that way. There are democratically elected laws on the books that call for the deportation of illegal immigrants. It was such a part of an understanding in America that it was part of pop culture. Cheech and Chong made movies about deportation. Why now is it so controversial?
Well, those who oppose immigration enforcement have always tried to push a narrative that any enforcement is overzealous, overreaches, it's scary to communities, and law enforcement agencies should not be spending their time on this. But the truth is that we have a very generous legal immigration system, one of the most generous in the world, taking in more than 1 million people every year who've been sponsored by an employer or a family member or coming in as a refugee. And there are 4 million people in the world waiting for their turn to come in under one of those legal categories. We also have very expansive temporary work visa programs for employers who can make the case that they need to bring in workers from abroad, whether it's for farm work or seasonal labor or, to work as lifeguards for the summer in a cultural exchange program. So we have all these legal programs, but if we do not enforce the laws against people who come in illegally, if they get to stay, then it really makes a mockery of our legal immigration system. And we have immigration laws and limits for good reasons, because we don't want to have so much immigration that we're denying opportunities for Americans to get jobs, or if it becomes too costly.
It makes a mockery of the rule of law, period, not just our immigration laws. You know, this group of people, polling suggests the American public is all over the board on it. Somewhere between 40 and 60% support deporting illegal immigrants regardless of their criminal status. But the polling only matters, Jessica, insofar as it affects the next political election. The laws are still on the books. If you don't like the laws, then you should elect people that overturn the laws. The American people have those laws on the books, and they're a representation of the will of the people. And what I don't understand is why all of a sudden now are we asking for the United States government to ignore the will of the people to deport illegal immigrants, all illegal immigrants?
Well, again, I think it's this attempt by people who disagree with the way Trump is doing the job of enforcement to delegitimize it and to make the case for a big amnesty, which is not something that most Americans would support and which would be very costly for our country and simply encourage more illegal immigration. I mean, often that's what this boils down to as a political argument, is they only want the laws enforced against criminals so that everyone else can be legalized. But the problem, it just doesn't work. We tried that in 1986 and it was not effective.
Right.
What is effective is to enforce our laws, and people get the idea that they shouldn't try to come here illegally.
Right. I'm sorry, Jessica, I'm out of time. I'm way against the clock. But this is the conversation, okay? The worst of the worst, the ridiculous conversation about permanent residents or American citizens being deported. The real conversation is in the middle. What to do with the illegal immigrants that are here. That's the decision of the American people. Jessica Vaughn, thank you so much for being with us here today. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.